Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I want to start today with something that really shouldn't be notable. It shouldn't be news. It shouldn't be remarkable. It shouldn't be something where we would say, wow, look at that. But it is notable because of the way in which the Republican Party since the 2020 election has either outright said Joe Biden didn't really win this election or publicly played coy with it, saying we should investigate all claims of voter fraud. We should want to verify. We should be able to verify that the election wasn't rigged, kind of playing coy with it. Now, you might remember that Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger said, and we played the clip a couple weeks ago, no, none of us, no Republicans really believe that Donald Trump won the election, other than maybe a couple, whether he's signaling to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever by saying a couple. But the point was, Adam Kinzinger said, whatever most Republicans are saying publicly, privately, we know that Joe Biden actually won this election. Lauren Windsor, former guest on the David Pakman Show from The Undercurrent, she really does a good job with this type of thing. She confronted Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson, but confronted him not as someone saying, you've been spreading lies, but confronted him as someone pretending to believe that Donald Trump actually did win the election and that Donald Trump actually did win the state of Wisconsin. And we're going to look at the video, and it's very good. Here's a sort of summary from the Daily Beast. Senator Ron Johnson caught on hidden camera blaming Trump for the 2020 defeat. Wow. Why is that even a headline? It's a headline because they've been pretending that Trump actually won. We're going to look at the video. Here's a screenshot of it for people who are watching with us today. After he let's look at the video first and then discuss more. So again, this is Lauren Windsor going to Ron Johnson and pretending to be an unhinged right-winger who believes that Joe Biden didn't really win the election. Let's listen.
You know that Joe Biden didn't win this election. I mean, in my heart of hearts, I just he didn't win.
Do you know that? Do you
think that Joe Biden won this election?
Do you know in Wisconsin? Do you know the vote totals?
I don't know.
So without knowing the vote totals, you can't even state that opinion.
I just really need all the small chatter.
Well, I mean,
no. So let me give you the vote totals.
I know that there was a late night dump in Milwaukee.
Even throwing in that there was a vote dump, I mean, even that is pretty slickly done because that's a term Trump used, massive dumps of votes. This is really well done by Lauren.
I don't remember exactly what the numbers were.
Well, we've done a recount in Milwaukee. Prior to this election, I was the #1 vote getter statewide, just under 1.5 million votes, okay? This election, Trump got 1,610,000. No Republican had ever cracked 1.5 million. Numerous Democrats have gone over 1.6 or 1.5. So now for the first time in history, we have a president's candidate beating my vote total by 130,000 votes. Collectively, the state assembly candidates and
what's notable about this is not only is Ron Johnson clearly sure that Donald Trump didn't win, he actually knows historical mathematical context. And it's just a reinforcement of the fact that Adam Kinzinger clearly is right. 99% of these guys and gals, they know all the voter fraud stuff is BS.
Republican state assembly candidates got 1,661,000. The 8 congressional candidates also got 1,661,000. So we obviously counted enough Republican votes. The only reason Trump lost Wisconsin is 51,000 Republican voters didn't vote for him. They voted for other Republican candidates.
This is as clear as it can be. So understand the point that Johnson's making here is this is almost the point I made when I tweeted, if they believe that the results for the presidential are wrong, then the results for their own congressional and Senate races must also be wrong, right? And Ron Johnson is saying, listen, the numbers for state reps and all these other races, the numbers are coherent. The numbers make sense. And Trump just lost because 51,000 Republicans didn't vote for him. It's very simple. A little more here.
You're telling me that Joe Biden won this state fair and square? Because I don't see it. I don't believe it.
Well, look at the totals. It's certainly plausible. There's nothing obviously skewed about the results. There isn't.
there's nothing skewed about the results.
About the results in Wisconsin. Now, I'm not saying what's happening in Maricopa County. I don't know the same thing. Look at the numbers again. Collectively.
Come on, Wisconsin and Georgia and Arizona.
Listen. You're not listening.
I am listening.
So listen.
Republican visibly frustrated by people who insist Trump actually won.
Collectively, Republicans got 1.661 million votes. 51,000 more votes than Trump got. Trump lost by 20,000. If Trump got all the Republicans voted for Trump the way they voted for the assembly candidates, he would have won. He didn't get 51,000 votes that other Republicans got. That's why he lost.
Okay.
So it's a very simple case. The margin was only 20,000 in Wisconsin. All of the numbers make sense in congressional races, in state races, etc. But there were 51,000 Republicans, a small slice that didn't vote Trump because they didn't like Trump or they didn't want to vote for Trump or for whatever the case may be. And that's more than the margin of victory for Joe Biden. That's it. That's all it is. And this is exactly what Adam Kinzinger told us. These guys don't really believe that Trump won. I mean, am I sort of surprised Ron Johnson didn't blame Antifa? Yeah, maybe. But it's actually not that, in these one-on-one conversations, they will sometimes, or what they believe are one-on-one conversations, they will sometimes tell what is actually the truth. As soon as you get two people there or you get a room full of Republicans for a Q&A town hall, it's time for the whole song and dance. And well, listen, what I know is there are people who claim that their votes weren't counted correctly. And we should be able to investigate all of that and let the results fall. Come on, dude. He knows it. And most of these people know it. And really nice job there by Lauren Windsor. All right. Joe Rogan, podcast host Joe Rogan, is positive for COVID, and he is taking like 7 different drugs and treatments, including Ivermectin, a horse dewormer, and anti-parasitic in some doses for humans. Okay. All right. Well, we'll talk about that. This is notable for a couple of different reasons. First, actually, maybe we'll look at the video clip first. But to set the stage, this is the same Joe Rogan, on whose show I've appeared twice. And he may never have me back on because I've been critical of the things he said about COVID and vaccines. This is the same Joe Rogan who said if you're healthy and you eat right like he does, you don't need to be vaccinated. Let's look at the video clip of Joe Rogan explaining what happened, listen to the list of medications and treatments that he's on, and then there's much to discuss here.
Hello, friends. So I got back from the road Saturday night, feeling very weary. I had a headache, and I just felt run down. And just to be cautious, I separated from my family, slept in a different part of the house. And throughout the night, I got fevers and sweats, and I knew what was going on. So I got up in the morning, got tested, and turns out I got COVID. So we immediately threw the kitchen sink at it. All kinds of meds, monoclonal antibodies, Ivermectin, Z-Pak, prednisone, everything. And I also got an NAD drip and a vitamin drip, and I did that 3 days in a row. And so here we are on Wednesday, and I feel great. I really only had one bad day. Sunday sucked, but Monday was better. Tuesday felt better than Monday, and today I feel good. I actually feel pretty fucking good. That's the good news. The bad news is we have to move the Friday show in Nashville.
Okay. So there's a bunch of stuff that is important to talk about here. Now, again, people have been, every time I talk about Joe Rogan and the vaccine stuff or whatever, people write to me to say, David, I thought you were friends with Joe. I've been on Joe's show twice. We've corresponded via Twitter a few times. I would say any of this to Joe. And this is not like some hot takedown. I'm going to tell you what I think kind of doesn't make sense about all of this. There's the macro and there's the micro. Okay. The big picture story from Rogan has been, this is not serious enough where young, healthy people should really go and get vaccinated. It doesn't make sense. What's interesting is way back when I was last on with Joe, he said he did think wearing masks outdoors made sense, even though I was kind of saying at the time, I'm not really sure about that. More recently with Bill Burr, he said masks outside. Are you wearing a mask outside? Sort of like that doesn't make sense. He talked about how this is not something that is serious enough that if you are not an at-risk individual, if you're healthy and eating right or whatever, you don't really need to be vaccinated. Now, that immediately raises the question, as a healthy person who eats right and stays fit, why then did Joe Rogan need 7 medications and treatments, or five or six medications and treatments, including things that aren't actually approved by the FDA either at all, outside of emergency use, or aren't approved by the FDA for COVID? That is, Joe Rogan's argument was no vaccine for a lot of people because the benefits don't outweigh the risks. COVID isn't that serious. Healthy people work out, eat right. But then you're throwing the kitchen sink at it. That doesn't really make sense. You don't need the vaccine if Rogan really didn't get it. I'm taking him at his word that he didn't get it. We hear about people who are secretly vaccinated. I have no reason to believe that Joe Rogan would do that. There are some right-wing hosts who we later found out are right-wing politicians. I believe Rogan hasn't gotten the vaccine, but then you're throwing the kitchen sink at it. And it's important also to understand, we're going to go through the medications. A lot of people wouldn't have access or wouldn't be able to afford all of this stuff either. So there are some people who are hearing this and they're saying, look, Rogan was right. He had one bad day. He's not vaccinated and now he's fine. Of course, that's to some degree chance, but also we'll talk about the NAD drips and vitamin drips and all these things, whether or not those things do anything. If you believe that they do, a lot of that stuff's not covered by insurance and the average person can't handle that. The vaccine is free. It's important to remember that. Now let's go to the micro, okay? So Rogan says he took monoclonal antibodies. That is only approved via emergency use authorization. It's available relatively widely, but remember that the Pfizer vaccine is fully approved by the FDA. And same as Moderna, which is only approved by emergency use for now, although in a couple of weeks it will likely be fully approved. The use of monoclonal antibodies is experimental in the same sense that they've been saying the vaccine is. So number one on the list is something that's only approved by EUA. So I'm not sure why someone would hesitate on the vaccine over lack of approval, but then go and take the monoclonal antibodies. That's a hypocrisy. I'm not saying it's Rogan's hypocrisy, but for people who are saying the antibodies are available, that's as experimental as all the vaccines were up until 10 days ago. And now Pfizer is actually approved to a more strict level. Now, then there's Ivermectin. Ivermectin is a frequently used cattle medication. It is sometimes used in humans as well. There's no denying that in different doses. As of a few days ago, the big paper that a lot of people were pointing to say ivermectin works for COVID, it's based on Egyptian data, that was retracted. Why? They didn't have a proper placebo group. The Egyptian paper a lot of people point to was ivermectin versus hydroxychloroquine, not ivermectin versus placebo, the way you're supposed to do it in a double-blind randomized controlled trial. Then a group called the Cochrane Collaboration looked at all of the meta-analyses of the clinical trials on ivermectin. They found that a bunch of the individual studies had problems, just like the Egyptian one. And once you look at just the studies that are done correctly, they say there is very low to low certainty evidence that ivermectin is at all effective on COVID-19. Okay, World Health Organization, Infectious Disease Society of America, even the manufacturer of ivermectin, Merck, say there is no meaningful evidence for clinical efficacy in COVID-19 with ivermectin. Last week, the FDA started warning people, don't go and get ivermectin for COVID-19. And now the American Medical Association is asking doctors, do not give anybody ivermectin for COVID-19. So that's the second thing that Rogan is taking. Importantly, not approved, even under emergency use authorization for COVID. The Pfizer vaccine is fully approved. Lastly, real quick before we move on, how do people start trying ivermectin and stuff like hydroxychloroquine? The basics are, at the beginning of all this, when we didn't have a treatment, we didn't have vaccines, doctors in different parts of the world started trying cheap stuff that's just around. Hydroxychloroquine has been around a really long time and it's very cheap. Ivermectin is very, very cheap. So they start trying it. And if you have small cohorts of 20, 30 patients, and most people recover from COVID anyway, you're likely to get what is some apparent efficacy signal if you just have a bunch of random doctors saying, here, I'm going to give 30 of my patients ivermectin, or I'm going to give 30 of my patients hydroxychloroquine. By chance, you might get what appears to be an efficacy signal. And you're just throwing this stuff at it because it's cheap and available, but that's not how we actually do science. Okay, so that's ivermectin. Z-Pak, this is the antibiotic azithromycin. Now, you would say, why would you take an antibiotic for something that's a virus? And you would be right. There are some ideas that certain antibiotics could have an antiviral effect against some viruses. It's been studied with COVID and azithromycin. It doesn't appear to be the case. Study looked at a single dose of azithromycin, and it didn't change the proportion of COVID patients who were symptom-free versus symptomatic after 14 days. Now, you might say, well, David, why are they only getting one dose? Typically, azithromycin is given, as a course of treatment. Another study looked at intravenous azithromycin, 10 doses over 10 days. It also didn't statistically improve outcomes. Okay, so that's the third thing Rogan is taking. Fourth, prednisone. Prednisone is one of many steroids. And remember that there was the discussion of dexamethasone for COVID earlier in the pandemic. This is a very basic idea. This is the idea that steroids can mitigate the inflammatory response, and that inflammatory response can lead to lung injury in COVID. So you give the steroid, it reduces the inflammatory response in the lungs. Maybe it helps people recover. Maybe it helps people just feel better in the short run. That's generally connected to reality. If you have inflammation, you look at using a steroid, but unless you're actually having lung compromise, it's really not clear that it makes sense to take steroids. It can have nasty side effects. It can actually make you worse with some respiratory viruses. In previous outbreaks of novel coronavirus infections like MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or SARS, corticosteroid therapy sometimes actually extended how long people had the virus in their system. So it's really unclear. So that's kind of like a question mark. We don't know how involved Rogan's lungs were. It may have made sense to try throwing a steroid at it, or maybe not. The other stuff isn't really even medication. The NAD drip, that's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's very en vogue right now to do these drips. There's no indication it helps with COVID. Same thing with IV vitamins. It's very popular for wealthy folks to start getting these IV drips. I know people who do it. There's no reason to think that it helps with COVID. Now, then there's the final thing here. If this stuff works, okay, let's just imagine all this stuff works. COVID must be pretty freaking serious to throw all of this stuff at it. And what I mean by that is, if COVID weren't serious, if COVID were just the flu, then you wouldn't, if you were Joe Rogan, be taking monoclonal antibodies, ivermectin, antibiotics, steroids, vitamins, and an NAD IV 3 days in a row. That's pretty serious, right? Do you really want to take all that stuff, each with its own side effect risk, if COVID isn't that serious for someone who eats right or works out or is generally healthy? That's completely incongruous. And with the flu, you don't go and take 7 medications and treatments. So that's the real important takeaway here. I would love to talk to Rogan about this. He may have seen my last clips about him and decided I'm not having David Pakman on anymore. He may not even be aware of the clips. I have no idea, but I welcome the opportunity to talk to him about it. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com YouTube.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. All right, let me not waste time because we have so many things to talk about and jump right into this next story. This is an interesting sort of glimpse into the mind of those who are talking about impeaching Joe Biden. We've seen radical members of Congress like Marjorie Taylor Greene, as well as Lauren Boebert and others talk about, I have filed articles of impeachment against Joe Biden. I plan to impeach Joe Biden. If we take the House, we're going to impeach Joe Biden, etc. And aside from the fact that there's no reason to justify an impeachment of Joe Biden, there's no justification for impeaching Joe Biden. One of the things I've mentioned is if you impeach Joe Biden, Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States. Is that really what they want to achieve? And if you impeach Kamala Harris, then Nancy Pelosi becomes president of the United States, unless you impeach Biden and Harris and get them convicted and removed after taking control of the House, in which case the Republican Speaker of the House would become president of the United States. To his credit, a right-wing radio host, Glenn Beck, actually confronted Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert with this and said, well, but if you impeach Biden, then it goes to Harris. Does that really make sense? Is that really what you want? And listen to the level of delusion with which Lauren Boebert responded to this accurate issue with Lauren Boebert's plan. Let's listen together.
Kamala Harris as president. Does it get any better?
Right.
So, of course, that is the number one question. When you start thinking about impeachment and discussing that, you start going down the list. Well, do we really want President Harris? Do we really want President Pelosi? She certainly has shown what she does with the People's House here in Washington, D.C. I can imagine what she would do with the White House.
OK, so what's the plan, Lauren? Tell us. Listen to this.
So I have legislation that will be introduced in impeaching both Biden and Harris, and Nancy Pelosi can follow them out the freaking door. She certainly needs to be held accountable for this as well. And we have called, as the Freedom Caucus, we have called on Leader McCarthy to introduce a resolution to vacate the chair.
OK, they don't control the House of Representatives. Oh, there might be a few more seconds here.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Oh, so even Glenn Beck is surprised by the level of stupidity of this. So, of course, there's 99% of this is gutter trash. 1% of it is something we actually need to be aware of. So, OK, what's the gutter trash? The gutter trash is assuming that for as long as they don't control the House or the Senate, this is all just idiocy. You're not impeaching Joe Biden. You're not impeaching Joe Biden together with Kamala Harris. Kevin McCarthy is not, he can introduce whatever he wants to vacate the speakership and take it from Nancy Pelosi. None of it is happening. Even if they take control of the House in 2022 and somehow they manage to actually, quote, impeach, which remember, the House files the articles, then you have a trial in the Senate. Even if they manage to do it, the Senate is not going to convict on the basis of what's happened so far. The Senate is not going to convict Joe Biden. The Senate is not going to convict Kamala Harris. So 99% of this is just nonsense and delusions, and it shows us how delusional she is. But I think it is almost certain that if Republicans do take control of the House in November of 2022, just 14 months from now, well, the election is in 14 months. Taking over would be in 16 and a half months. I think they absolutely impeach Joe Biden. I think that there is no question that these Republicans are furious about the fact that Donald Trump was impeached twice for things he deserved to be impeached for, and they are determined to impeach Joe Biden. So the plan of impeachment might work if they get the majority in 22. No Senate is going to actually convict Joe Biden based on what he's done so far. Certainly not Kamala Harris either. And the idea of when you're in the minority, vacating the chair, it's just absolutely delusional. But good for Glenn Beck for confronting her about it. I'm glad that he did. Candace Owens has been refused a COVID test because the operator of an independent COVID testing clinic said, you're not getting a test here because you've been a purveyor of COVID disinformation. And immediately, Candace Owens says, is this woman racist? Now, why is this interesting? This is interesting because Candace Owens has been a very popular voice on the right as a black conservative supposedly, it actually seems this all might be a character, a grift to make money, but let's imagine that it's real. And Candace Owens has been a loud voice saying all of this stuff about systemic racism, all of this stuff about the right being racist. The real problem, she has said over the years, is that the left so quickly goes to assuming anything they don't like is racist. I'm going to play a video for you here in which Candace Owens immediately says, maybe the woman denying me a COVID test is racist. Okay, so she's doing it. Before getting into that, I want to mention there's been a small controversy over the last few days with Candace Owens where she had to cancel an event because she was suddenly ill, but has been insisting that it's not coronavirus. And yet here she is talking about how she's actually been seeking a coronavirus test, which obviously raises questions about why, if you definitely don't have the virus, why are you getting tested for the virus? But she was denied a COVID test. We will look at why in a moment. And here she is immediately saying, maybe the woman denying me the test is racist. I thought, Candace, we weren't supposed to immediately say the motivation must be racism for something that we don't like. Take a look.
This thing, maybe COVID's racist, maybe Susanna's racist. I don't freaking know. I don't know. The last time
Susanna is the woman who denied her the test.
A Democrat refused a black person service and said it's because I don't like your thoughts and ideas. We were in the Jim Crow era. But here we are, and we're actually in Aspen, Colorado, and Susanna wants you to know that she will Google you. This virus is not political, but she's Googling people that are signing up for tests to make sure that their politics align with Susanna's.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. Well,
okay. So, dear God. So the argument here that Candace is making is it's conceivable that I was denied a COVID test because Susanna is racist. Now, here's the email that was sent from Susanna to Candace. Subject, appointment cancellation notice. I've just learned of this testing request, and as the owner of this business, I'm going to refuse this booking and deny service. Whoa, wait a second. Isn't this what conservatives want? A business owner to decide who do I want to serve and who don't I want to serve? Susanna wrote, we cannot support anyone who has proactively worked to make this pandemic worse by spreading misinformation, politicizing and discouraging the wearing of masks, and actively dissuading people from receiving life-saving vaccinations. Candace Owens has done all that. That's accurate. The only other local testing option is the free kiosk by City Hall. They mail their tests to Texas and have inconsistent result times. Do not take appointments. So it's walk-in only midday weekdays in their back alley. My team and myself have worked overtime to exhaustion, unpaid and underpaid this last year, spending our own capital to ensure our community remains protective. It would be unfair to them and to the sacrifices we have all made this year to serve you, Susanna. That is the free market of ideas that Candace Owens supposedly supports. And it is a business owner deciding what is best for themselves. And even though Candace Owens has made money for years and years saying, look at all these Democrats immediately finding racism. The racism is seeing the racism. And yet in the first 5 seconds, she says, maybe Susanna herself is racist. What a pathetic hypocrite. And remember, it's almost certainly all a grift. We'll have more on this on our Instagram. Find us there at David Pakman Show. Find me on Instagram at david.pakman. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's great to welcome to the program today Vincent Racaniello, who is a virology professor at Columbia University and also host of the podcast This Week in Virology. It's so great to have you on today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Glad I could make it after all that rain yesterday.
Yeah, I saw the videos. It's something else. Listen, I'll just jump into some things because there are maybe some specific things that are new ground for my audience that I think might be interesting to talk about. And I think it'll open up a broader discussion with something like the idea that there's a period of time during which you can be incubating this virus. In other words, you have been infected. You don't yet have symptoms. You would not yet test positive if you were to be tested. What is actually happening during that period of time? Is it that there are some virus particles in you, but they've not established themselves in your system? Like, what is taking place at that point?
So let's think when you get infected, you're typically inhaling droplets that have been produced by someone else, right? They're infected, their droplets have virus. You inhale them into your nose. Typically, they go into the cells lining your nose and further back, which we call the nasopharynx. And the viruses then attach to cells. It's not easy to do that. That's why a lot of viruses have to get in you to start an infection. But the viruses attach to cells, they're taken into the cells, and then they begin to multiply. And in the very first hours, it's very low levels. The viruses are in maybe a few cells. They're beginning to multiply. You can't really detect it by PCR. But then you go above a threshold where those cells produce virus. The virus infects neighboring cells, and it goes on and on. Maybe it takes about 20 hours for a cycle to complete in a cell. So after a few days, you are now at the point where you would test positive by PCR. So in that interval that you're interested in, the virus is multiplying, your immune system is beginning to detect it. You have the earliest immune system, which is called innate immunity, can detect what's going on there. And in fact, most infections are stopped very early on before they progress any farther. But then if the innate immune system doesn't work, and part of that is interferons, which you may have heard about, which block virus infections in many ways. If the innate immune system doesn't work, the virus keeps multiplying, and then we have activation of other immune systems, which include antibodies and T cells, and then it becomes a race to see if the virus can outpace it. And then after a certain number of days, maybe 5 days on average, you might then feel symptoms. You might get a scratchy throat, you might get a headache, you might get a fever and so forth, which might prompt you to go get tested. And bingo, there you go, you get a PCR test and you're positive.
I have friends who have gotten a bunch of the Abbott home tests. And for example, a friend had a birthday party with 10 people last week. And of course, everyone had to be vaccinated, but he also tested everybody on the way in. And his belief was, if there was a negative from someone who was in this state you and I just described, the virus has entered their body, but they are not yet testing positive, that it's okay because they are almost certainly not contagious at that point. Is that actually our best assessment of one's level of how contagious you are during that intervening period?
Yes, the PCR tests are very sensitive. So if they are picking up nucleic acid, you have a good amount of viral multiplication. And if you're negative on this test and you go to an affair for a couple of hours, certainly in the time of that, you're not going to change from non-infectious to being infectious. So if you're negative, I would say you have 24-hour window before you might even start shedding virus and infecting others.
When it comes to the conversation of variants, I've read a number of pieces that say that evolutionarily, the way that there is selection pressure on these variants, the idea of a significantly more deadly variant becoming dominant is not particularly likely. I know that there's a lot in there about level of infectivity versus the deadly nature and a lot of things to unpack. But let's start with, is it true that it is unlikely that a much more deadly strain would become dominant? If so, why? If not, why not?
When we look at all the viral outbreaks in humans over the years, for the most part, viruses do not become more deadly. If anything, over a long period, they become less deadly. They become better adapted to their hosts. And I'm talking many, many years, maybe hundreds of years in time. And so there's no evolutionary reason why a virus would become more deadly, because it would kill its host faster and it would be less likely to transmit. And transmission, of course, is the raison d'etre for a virus. So the variants are certainly arising because of some kind of selection pressure, right? We think part of it is immunity in the population. We didn't see these variants until late in 2020, when a lot of people globally had already been infected or vaccinated and had some kind of immunity. So antibodies can certainly put pressure on a virus so that you would select a virus that is slightly different and can evade the antibody. It happens with influenza virus every year. And there are probably other selection mechanisms that we don't know about because these variants have a lot of different changes. So I think in the end, what we can say about the variants, they're selected probably mainly because of immune pressure. They're not likely to be more deadly, even though there's some studies here and there that suggest that they're not very well done. They're not very well controlled. I think the main issue is immunity and escape from it.
And over a period of time, would we, or let me put it a different way, there is already a trial going on with a modified mRNA vaccine tailored to more recent variants. I don't know the exact timeline of when that may become the one that you get when you go to CVS or Walgreens or wherever the case may be. Is it likely that, like the flu shot, we would need to be tailoring the vaccine to the most recent variants?
It's certainly possible. Now, with influenza, that can happen every year or two, right? We tailor a new vaccine. And we have so much experience with influenza that we know when antibody levels drop below a certain point in people, we know that correlates with them getting more severe disease. We don't have that information yet for SARS-CoV-2. We don't know what antibody levels are protective. We don't know how low you can go and still be protected from disease. Right now, the vaccines protect against severe disease and death, even though antibody levels are declining. So it's not clear when we would need to change the vaccine. I think we have to wait and see if more and more vaccinated people, this is the key, do fully vaccinated people start to get more sick? Do they get severe disease? Do they die? When we reach that point, then we talk about changing the virus vaccine.
Earlier on, there was the idea that was much repeated, I guess we would call it a belief, that the 2-dose regimen of either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine would likely be good for at least a year. There were discussions of 2 to 3 years, et cetera. More recently, there's been the data from Israel that shows that the antibody levels, although, as you say, we don't know exactly what that means in the real world, but antibody levels seem to start declining after 8 months. There's the idea maybe after 6 months, one would get a third dose. I've also read some doctors say the third dose will almost certainly be the last one. At this point, it seems to me we really just don't know. We really just can't say 3 is going to be it. What is it that we need to be looking at to really get an answer to that question?
So one thing we have to understand is that with every human viral vaccine, you get vaccinated, 6 to 8 months later, your antibody levels decline. It's the natural process. There's nothing new about SARS-CoV-2 vaccines and antibodies declining. I mean, although people are making it out to be a big deal, they are declining. And with that, there has been a push for boosters. What's not declining, though, is protection against severe disease and death. That remains robust. So the antibodies level decline. You may get infected even if you're fully vaccinated, but that happens with just about every other human viral vaccine that we know about, but you don't get serious disease. That's how we tested these vaccines to prevent COVID of any kind. Now we're getting mild COVID even after fully vaccinated. And so the key for a booster, so I think the booster idea is somewhat flawed because the idea is to push antibody levels up again, but they're going to decline in 6 to 8 months. So are we going to go every year and give people a booster? I don't think that's a good public health strategy, frankly. The key is, do we still prevent severe disease and death? So far, we are doing that. And as long as that protection remains strong, then I don't think we need to have a booster. And to think that it would be the last one, well, there's simply no data to suggest that. I think that would be great if it were, but we simply don't know.
When it comes to the seasonality of this, when we were going into last fall, there was, generally speaking, a consensus that we were going to see a big increase. And the explanations varied depending on what you looked at. Part of it was a similar explanation with influenza, that as it gets colder, people spend more time inside, and that's going to increase transmission. We were not yet vaccinating at that time. This fall, we seem to be seeing at least the growth of cases slow down. It's not yet declining, but if we're 6 to 8 weeks after where Europe is, maybe we are starting to get to a peak. So maybe we won't see that increase into fall and winter, although maybe we will. What's our best assessment right now as to the quote seasonality of this, and what is actually the source of that? What generates that?
So we really don't know how seasonal COVID is, right? Because it's brand new. And when you have a pandemic, that trumps all seasonality effects. So, for example, in 2009, the pandemic influenza virus emerged in August, which is totally weird because they usually come out in the winter. But when there's a pandemic, most people are not immune, so the virus can spread even though it's the wrong season. So that's what we're seeing with SARS-CoV-2. Now, there are other coronaviruses that infect us. They cause common colds. There are 4 different ones. They are seasonal. And it's likely just by extension that SARS-CoV-2 will be seasonal as well. Although still we're in this pandemic phase where seasonality gets trumped by simply, if you have a lot of susceptible people around, which we still do, the virus will reproduce whenever it wants to.
What is the actual mechanism for the seasonality? Is it as simple as the temperature forces people indoors and increases spread?
Well, that's a good question because seasonality is different for different viruses. In the heyday of polio in the world, that was one that spread in the summer, right? Warm weather when kids were out playing and so forth. But influenza is in the winter in seasonal, in temperate climates. And we think that's because of the low temperature allows the virus to remain infectious longer, and the low humidity keeps those droplets that you exhale, keeps them very small, because in humid conditions, they take on water, they drop to the ground more quickly. When it's dry, they can travel farther and infect people. But we don't know much about that for most other viruses. It's a really tough topic to understand.
So I know how to frame my next question. Have you seen the mask efficacy study from Bangladeshi data?
I have not.
You haven't? Okay.
Tell me.
So my understanding of the Bangladeshi study on mask efficacy is that for older cohorts, there was definitively reduced transmission from mask wearing, although the statistical significance of the reduction seemed to be lower the younger the cohort you looked at. There may be other confounding factors there. So, I think that the devil is probably in the details. What's our best assessment right now of the impact of masks on reducing spread? Because it's become very politicized and controversial, and maybe the science doesn't suggest it should be.
Yeah, so masking is tough because it's hard to do a good study, right? You would love to be able to take a group of people with masks and without and challenge them with virus and see the mask, but we just can't do that. So we have to use surrogates. And so I think the best estimate for COVID is that when worn properly, and that's a big if, because not everyone wears them properly. And I see more and more people just having them below their nose because they're so used to it. Maybe it stops 60% of transmission. And it makes sense because the droplets that carry the virus, they get caught up in the mask material. It's not the virus that gets trapped. It's the droplets carrying the virus. So if you wear them properly, so there are no gaps, maybe 60%. It's not going to be 100% ever. And we know that in many countries where they use masks quite often in respiratory virus season, it does make an impact. So and my view is that it's an easy thing to do. It's not too much of an inconvenience. I'm used to it by now, so I don't really see the issue.
Let's pause our conversation with host of This Week in Virology, Vincent Racaniello, there on the podcast, the TV show, the radio show. The full conversation is going to be posted to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show. If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. So even though the prior president, Donald Trump, was one of the most authoritarian leaning dictator wannabe presidents that we've had in the modern political era, there are people on the right, and this includes Republican elected officials, and this includes some people in right-wing media, who want you to believe that it is Joe Biden who is about to imprison people, force people to do this or to do that, regulate people into oblivion, things that Joe Biden has actually shown no interest in doing. And one such example of this came to us from Fox News a couple days ago, where Geraldo Rivera was hosting something on Fox News, and he interviewed Fox and Friends, I guess, weekend host Will Cain. Will Cain is not like part of the big three hosts of the weekday Fox and Friends, but I guess he must be a weekend guy or a fill-in guy. And Will Cain showed up and said that soon Americans who were not vaccinated against COVID-19 are going to be put in camps, sort of like concentration camps, FEMA camps. Remember, FEMA camps when Barack Obama was president was a big thing. And this was all part of being against masks and being against vaccines and all of these other things. So let's listen to this together and see if there's any evidence presented, actually.
Welcome back. As COVID cases rage in several locations across the country, the CDC telling unvaccinated people not to travel over this Labor Day weekend. With CNN's Don Lemon going even further, pointing this scolding message to those who still refuse to get the shot.
Some people who are so selfish are saying, it's my freedom and I don't want to get vaccinated, I don't want to do that. Okay, fine. But think about someone other than yourself. And if you don't believe that COVID is real and that it can affect your health and possibly take your life, don't go to the hospital then when you get sick.
Don't go to the hospital if you get sick. That's a little harsh, Dagan. But isn't it logical to say that vaccination plus mask equals travel, unvaccinated? Isn't it prudent?
They don't even know what they're talking about.
For unvaccinated people not to travel.
I would, if I wasn't vaccinated, I think this is a personal choice. If I wasn't vaccinated, then I'm a hermit. I might stay at home, but that is a personal choice. Unvaccinated people to vaccinated people, if you got the shot, you should be fine. But I want to
really great medical analysis here.
Expose, and I'm actually not going to steal this from Greg because I know Greg has talked about this before, but this exposes the combination of like dumbassery and cruelty by Don Lemon, because he's literally saying if you smoked and you get lung cancer, you don't get any treatment.
Yes.
If you didn't wear sunscreen, you have melanoma, you don't get cancer treatment. You ate too many cheeseburgers, no open heart surgery for you. So that's. Again, he's too stupid to be on TV, but he's perfect for CNN.
But there's two things going on here, Will, and I know how deeply you feel about this.
Yeah.
There's the premise that unvaccinated people should not travel because of the risk, the exponential risk they pose to people, children, for example. And the other thing is the cruelty of the cavalier. Well, don't go to the hospital then if you were that arrogant. Not
Everybody sort of seems confused on this segment, if you can't tell.
Vaccinated, but in terms of the first, the CDC is advising people if you're unvaccinated, don't travel.
So let me work that backwards. Regarding the second point you made, whether or not it's cruel, Dagan's exactly right. We're veering dangerously close to exterminationist language.
What? Extermination?
Otherizing
exterminationist.
Absolutely. That's the next step. Putting the unvaccinated into someplace else, camps, whatever it may be. When you listen to the cruelty of Don Lemon.
What is Will talking about? The unvaccinated are more likely to end up dead in the morgue from COVID than they are to end up in some kind of camp for the unvaccinated. This reminds me of, like in high school, in college, there was always some kind of know-it-all who would have an epiphany of some kind and they would rant, and nobody really wants to argue with them. So you just kind of go, okay, all right, moving on. That camps and exterminationism, that's what Will Cain is making me think of here. And remember that the predictions that they're going to end up in camps have been going on for a long time when Democrats have been president. Remember, under Obama, there were going to be FEMA camps and people were going to be sent to FEMA camps, re-education camps, et cetera. It didn't happen. It's just par for the course when a Democrat is in the White House. Now, meanwhile, Tucker Carlson claims that the left just wants to kill unvaccinated people. And his guest, Teddy Daniels, who's a former officer, pro-Trump military veteran running for something, I think, agrees. Here is the left wants to kill the unvaccinated. No, the vaccines are supposed to save people, guys.
Yeah, this is still America, Tucker. OK, if you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. Yeah. If you don't want to wear a mask, don't wear a mask. That's what makes this country great with the vaccines. If you've had that conversation with your doctor and you feel a vaccine is the best route for you, go for it. Cool. But for those that don't, that's also cool. You know, let people live their lives.
Wait, but shouldn't we kill people who don't get the vaccine?
Well, that's what the left wants to do.
Yeah, I've noticed.
You know, that's what they...
What? Do people watch this stuff and believe it? I think to some degree they must. The left wants to put into camps the unvaccinated. The left wants to kill the unvaccinated. And the problem is that this stuff has worked to weaponize disinformation, anti-science beliefs in a way that is preventing us from actually dealing with the pandemic the way we could. Delta has been a problem essentially everywhere, but there are countries that have dealt with it far better, countries that have higher vaccination rates, countries where people are actually following the medical guidelines. And they have turned it not just into medical guidelines, they have turned it into a political battle that they assess to be life and death along the wrong lines. It is, in a sense, life or death, right? I mean, we know that your likelihood of getting really sick from COVID is way lower if you're vaccinated. We know that your likelihood of dying from COVID is way lower if you're vaccinated. It is life or death, but they've got a completely different life or death sort of battle line drawn. And it's unfortunately worked really, really well at convincing a lot of different people. Hey, this next story, I don't even fully understand this story. I'm hoping we can try to figure it out together. There's a pro-Trump election clerk named Tina Peters accused of not counting ballots in some local races. So like this would be actual election fraud carried out as pro-Trump election fraud. It's being investigated. She is reportedly now being hidden by My Pillow CEO Mike Lindell. There's a story in the Daily Beast about it. And the article explains that during Peters' first year as clerk in Mesa County in 2019, her office was blamed for leaving more than 570 uncounted ballots in a box long past an election. They just didn't count them. Less than a year later, one of her office's drop boxes leaked ballots, sending some floating in the summer breeze. Like, I'm not talking about a metaphorical leaked. They just got caught in the wind. The ballots were floating around in the air. Okay. Now Peters has gone underground, reportedly hiding in a safe house provided by Mike Lindell after she allegedly participated in a breach of Mesa County voting machine data this year. That data soon wound up on conspiracy websites, making Peters a folk hero among the MAGA set and the subject of an FBI investigation. Peters, who did not return requests for comment, took office in 2019 after her predecessor reached the term limit. What followed was an unusually bombastic tenure in a typically low drama role. While overseeing the November 2019 general election, Peters' office forgot to count 574 ballots, leaving them unattended in a drop box outside her office for months. That slip up coincided with a rush of departures from Peters' office. In December of 2019, nearly 20 of Peters' 32-person staff had departed. More staff quit days after missing ballots were discovered, bringing the departure count over 24. The Colorado Secretary of State's office told Peter to get her act together. The Secretary of State's office appointed someone to be in the clerk's office to help with the election. Patty Inshow, a Democrat and experienced former Mesa County clerk employee, was hired to help Peters with elections. But just 2 months into Inshow's role, Peters fired her, accusing her of not doing assigned work, an allegation InShow denied. The rift turned ugly, Peters' staffer filing a criminal complaint against InShow for allegedly not working during a pandemic. And the latest now is that Peters reportedly is hiding out in a house rented or provided by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell. It's all just crazy, and it's crazy on a few fronts. Number one, the side that is regularly alleging the voter fraud seems to be the side regularly caught allegedly committing it. And then, of course, Mike Pillow's involvement in all of this just makes such little sense. We're going to try to get more information about the story, but that's the latest as I understand it right now. Guys, this voicemail is really depressing. Here's a caller who called the voicemail number yesterday, 219-2-DAVID-P, and he explains he's going to get vaccinated, but he didn't want to. Why? Because his mom got a headache from the vaccine. Listen to this.
Hey, David, how's it going? So, I work at Ohio University in Ohio, and they just mandated the coronavirus vaccine. So It looks like I'm going to have to get it because I don't want to be poor and stupid. So I'm going to get it.
I guess what he means is he would lose his job and he needs money. The stupid part, I don't know if he means it would be stupid not to get vaccinated or it would be stupid to lose your job. But then listen to this.
But I was holding off until now because my mom got it and she got very sick from it. She had a really bad headache and I just didn't want to go through that. So I was kind of putting it off because I didn't want to get it. My mom got very sick, So I'm just wondering what your opinions are about places that are mandating the vaccine for people that don't want to get it. Just what your opinions are about that.
Yeah, I am absolutely fine with the COVID vaccine being added to the list of required vaccines if that's what an employer or an organization wants to do. For kids to go to school, there's been a long list of necessary vaccines for a very long time. Vaccine requirements aren't new. They're just adding the now approved COVID vaccine to the list. But I'm really worried about a headache. I got a headache when I got the vaccine. I had a very, mild fever. My arm hurt. It was like one night where I didn't feel well. I felt flu-like, and then I was better, and then I was vaccinated. You would choose not to get the vaccine to avoid one day of headache when it reduces your risk of getting hospitalized or dying from COVID by more than 90%. That doesn't make sense, and that's really, really concerning to me. And I've heard it from others too. I don't know. I don't want my arm to hurt for a day. Well, right. But then you'll be vaccinated and you'll be significantly protected against hospitalization and death. Don't you? Yeah, but my arm, I don't know. I might have a headache. We've got a real uphill battle here, guys. Real uphill battle. But it sounds like this guy's going to get the vaccine, and that's good. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Sign up at joinpacman.com and get instant access. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.